أما إذا ارتفعت أسعار النفط بين 100 و 110 دولارات للبرميل، فإنه إجمالي الناتج المحلي بمعنى النمو الاقتصادي العالمي سيخسر حوالي 0.6%، بمعنى أنه الاقتصاد العالمي وعالي من عدم القدرة على تحقيق الاستقرار الاقتصادي قد يصاب من هذه الحرب.
مع الزميل حاتم غندير، ما الذي سيقابلها من خسائر في الاقتصاد العالمي؟
المسألة الأساسية هي إلى أي مدى ستستمر هذه الحرب وهذا النزاع. إذا ما استمرت إلى أكثر من شهر فإن ذلك سيلحق ضررا كبيرا بالنسبة للاقتصاد العالمي على صعيد التضخم وكذلك سلاسل الإمداد. وأود أشير أن أكبر ضرر سيلحق بالدول الآسيوية، فكما نعرف أن الصين تحصل على احتياجاتها من النفط من إيران، وكذلك الهند وغيرها من الدول الآسيوية تحصل على احتياجاتها من الدول الخليج، في حين أن الدول الأوروبية لا تحتاج إلى الكثير، وكثير من الدول الأوروبية تحصل على حاجتها من النفط المسال من الولايات المتحدة. ووفقا لتقديرات مؤسسة ساكس التي أشارت إلى أن هنالك حوالي 2 مليار برميل من النفط كاحتياط، وسنرى الآن الاستفادة من هذا الاحتياط.
هناك تقديرات الآن بأن يصل سعر برميل النفط إلى 150 دولارا للبرميل في غضون أسبوعين إلى 3 أسابيع. ما هو تأثير ذلك أيضا؟
أنا ربما أتبنى نظرة أكثر تفاؤلية من تلك التي صرح بها وزير الدولة لشؤون الطاقة القطري. نعم، الآن أسعار النفط ارتفعت إلى 87 دولارا بالنسبة لخام برنت، ولم تصل إلى 100. ولو تابعنا السوق أو مستقبل السوق كما أتابعه الآن، فإنه من المذهل أن سعر البرميل خلال 3 أشهر مستقبلية هو 70 دولارا، وبالتالي إذا ما تم حل هذه الحرب خلال شهر فأعتقد أن الأمور ستعود إلى وضعها الطبيعي.
وإذا استمرت الحرب لأكثر من ذلك سيد بويفيلد، نتحدث هنا أيضا عن ما تخسره أطراف هذه الحرب، إيران، الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية مع ما تشهده ميزانيتها أيضا المحدودة، وأيضا إسرائيل التي خرجت بخسائر أيضا من حرب غزة لعامين.
نعم بالتأكيد الحرب هي عمل مكلف للغاية. نعم، إيران ستحاول أن تطيل أمد النزاع على الصعيد الجغرافي على الأقل، وهنالك دول أوروبية تحاول أن تضغط على الولايات المتحدة من أجل إبرام صفقة، وهنالك ضغوطات متزايدة على كل من الولايات المتحدة وإسرائيل وذلك من أجل إبرام اتفاق إذا ما زادت كلفة هذه الحرب على الدول الأوروبية وعلى باقي دول العالم.
هل ستستطيع، يعني ما الذي سيكلفه استمرار هذه الحرب للأطراف الثلاثة بمقتضى واقع الاقتصادي لكل طرف؟
أعتقد أن ذلك يتوقف على مدة الحرب. هنالك أمر ربما لم يتم الحديث عنه كثيرا، وهو تأثير هذه الحرب على الصين، حيث أعلنت الصين أن نموها الاقتصادي لن يتجاوز 4.5 إلى 5% هذا العام، وبالتالي فإن تداعيات هذا النزاع على الصين أمر يتم إغفاله. ورأينا أمس
أشكرك كيث بويفيلد، الباحث في مركز الدراسات السياسية والاقتصادية، كنت معنا من لندن. شكرا لحاتم غندير وشكرا لمحمود الكن، رافقانا في هذه النافذة الاقتصادية التي نعود بعدها إلى وسيلة علمي لمتابعة التغطية في غرفة الأخبار. إليك وسيلة.
شكرا مريم. نواصل تغطيتنا للتصعيد في منطقة الشرق الأوسط، حيث تتواصل الهجمات الأمريكية الإسرائيلية والإيرانية المتبادلة وتداعياتها. وفي أحدث التطورات أصدر الجيش الإسرائيلي أوامر إخلاء لسكان قرى النبي-شيت والخضر وسرعين الفوقة وسرعين التحت في البقاع شرقي لبنان. ووسط الغارات الإسرائيلية المتواصلة على الضاحية الجنوبية لبيروت ومناطق أخرى جنوبي وشرقي لبنان، قالت وزارة الصحة اللبنانية إن 5 أشخاص استشهدوا وأصيب 7 في غارة إسرائيلية على مدينة صيدا جنوبي البلاد. في إيران قال الحرس الثوري الإيراني إنه أطلق أعدادا كبيرة من صواريخ مشهر 4 وخيبر وفتاح باتجاه قلب الأراضي المحتلة. في غضون ذلك قال مركز الدراسات الاستراتيجية والدولية بواشنطن إن تكلفة الحرب على إيران تبلغ يوميا نحو 891 مليونا ونصف المليون دولار. وفي أوروبا أفادت بلومبرغ بأنه يتوقع أن ترتفع العقود الآجلة للغاز الأوروبي هذا الأسبوع بنسبة تزيد عن 60%. ونقلت بلومبرغ عن مصادر أن المفوضية الأوروبية أكدت أن دول الاتحاد تحتفظ بمخزونات نفط استراتيجية تكفي ل90 يوما، وأن الاتحاد أبلغ أعضائه أنه لا مبرر للإفراج عن مخزونات النفط الاستراتيجية حاليا. نتابع الآن هذه المشاهد التي بثها الجيش الإيراني لإطلاق مسيرات قال إنها تستهدف المصالح الأمريكية في الكويت. معنا الآن شبكة مراسلين معنا من محيط الضاحية الجنوبية لبيروت مراسل الجزيرة جوني طانيوس، ومعنا من رميش في جنوب لبنان مراسلة الجزيرة كارمن جو خدار، معنا من شتورة في البقاع مراسلة الجزيرة كاترين حنا، ومن مصلى طهران معنا مراسل الجزيرة عمر هواش، ومن غرب رام الله معنا مراسل الجزيرة محمد خيري. أهلا بكم جميعا. نبدأ من ضاحية لبنان معك جوني لرصد آخر التطورات والمشهد من هناك مع استمرار الغارات الإسرائيلية.
وسيلة، مع استمرار الغارات الإسرائيلية على ضاحية بيروت الجنوبية واضح أن هناك مرحلة جديدة أو نسقا جديدا من التصعيد الإسرائيلي باتجاه الضاحية، وهناك جملة من الملاحظات التي لا بد من التوقف عندها لنفهم المشهد المستجد إذا صح التعبير في ضاحية بيروت الجنوبية. الغارات الأخيرة التي حصلت قبل قليل والليلة الماضية كانت في حقيقة الأمر أشد عنفا من الغارات التي شهدناها خلال الأيام الماضية على ضاحية بيروت الجنوبية. يبدو أن هناك أسلحة أو صواريخ أثقل وأكثر فتكا يستخدمها الجيش الإسرائيلي. حجم الانفجارات التي سمعت أكبر مما كان عليه في السابق. سحب الدخان التي ارتفعت امتدت على مساحة واسعة على أجزاء الضاحية، وأيضا يبدو أن حجم الدمار أكبر واسعة مما كان عليه خلال الأيام الماضية. الغارات التي تحصل على ضاحية بيروت الجنوبية باتت تحصل على موجات، وهذا ما أعلنه الجيش الإسرائيلي نفسه، بمعنى أنه منذ أصدر الجيش الإسرائيلي الإنذار الأخير بعد ظهر يوم أمس بوجوب إخلاء 4 مناطق أساسية، وهي حارة حريق برج المراجنة والحدد والشياح، باتت الغارات تأتي على شكل متتال على دفعات. الليلة الماضية 11 غارة متتالية، غارات عنيفة. هدأت الأمور لبعض الوقت وعادت الغارات قبل ظهر هذا اليوم، ونحن نتحدث حتى هذه اللحظة عن 3 غارات متتالية باتجاه حارة حريق ومناطق بين برج البراجنة والحدد. الملاحظة الأخرى هي أن إنذارات الجيش الإسرائيلي التي تتحدث عن مبان بعينها ضمن ضاحية بيروت الجنوبية غابت عن المشهد، وبالتالي يمكن القول أن الجيش الإسرائيلي بات يعتمد نهجا جديدا، كأنه من خلال البيان الذي أصدره لإخلاء 4 مناطق في الضاحية قال ما يجب قوله، وبالآن أصبحت الاستهدافات عشوائية تحصل من دون تحديد مبنى بعينه في المشكلات الحربية لتسد هذه المباني بشكل عشوائي وتدمرها بشكل كامل. وهناك ايضا ملاحظه اساسيه هي ان هذا المشهد باكمله يطرح على الطاوله من جديد ما يعرف لدى الجيش الاسرائيلي بعقيده الضاحيه التي اعتمدت في حرب تموز عام 2006 عندما دمرت ضاحيه بيروت الجنوبيه بغالبيتها. ومنذ ذاك الحين انطلقت هذه العقيده تدمير الضاحيه وهي خزان بيئه حزب الله داخل العاصمة اللبنانية أو عند تخوم العاصمة اللبنانية، وفي الضاحية أيضا طبعا مؤسسات تابعة لحزب الله. تدمير هذه المنطقة كعقاب لأهلها لدعمهم حزب الله لخلق شرخ بين البيئة الحاضنة والحزب، وأيضا للضغط سياسيا وعسكريا واستراتيجيا على حزب الله وأيضا على الدولة اللبنانية. وخلال الحرب الأخيرة أواخر عام 2024 كنا نلحظ تماما أنه كلما عمق حزب الله من استهدافاته باتجاه محيط تل أبيب، باتجاه سكنات ومواقع عسكرية في العمق الإسرائيلي، كان الرد يكون عنيفا باتجاه ضاحية بيروت الجنوبية، وقد يكون هذا الرابط قائما الآن أيضا.
ابقى معنا، نتوجه إليك كارمن جوخدار. وزارة الصحة اللبنانية تتحدث عن وقوع 5 شهداء و7 جرحى في الغارة الإسرائيلية على مدينة صيدا جنوبي البلاد. نرصد معك تطورات الأوضاع في الجنوب، كيف تبدو الآن؟ كارمن، يبدو أن كارمن جاهزة. هل تسمعينني كارمن؟ طيب، لا بأس. نذهب الآن إلى كاترين حنا لمتابعة تطورات في ضوء الإنذارات التي تم إصدارها من قبل الجيش الإسرائيلي. عدد من المواقع والمناطق في القطاع. كاترين.
انذارات الجيش الإسرائيلي لمناطق مختلفة في البقاع تتوالى وسيلة في إنذار هو الثاني خلال أقل من 24 ساعة. وجه الجيش الإسرائيلي قبل وقت قصير من الآن إنذار لإخلاء بلدات معينة في منطقة بعلبك، هي سرعين الفوق، سرعين التحت، النبشيت والخضر. سنحاول أن نقرب بالكاميرا لنظهر الموقع الجغرافي لهذه البلدات عند سفوح سلسلة جبال لبنان الشرقية عند الحدود مع سوريا. وفدنا من أبناء تلك البلدات في هذه
Breaking news, saya melaporkan.
Since they took the government in 1979, how much they hurt Christian and Americans and people all around the world. They are supporting a group which they call Hezbollah, radical Islamic.
Exactly.
So many accidents and bombing happens, and biggest one was 9/11. Now, the only way to stop their support to other radical Muslims around Lebanon and Syria around there is just to take the government out. And that was one thing that Mr. Trump said. That was one of the biggest reasons. And second reason is that ever since they took on the government, they're saying death to America, chanting constantly and constantly. And now they want to have the nuke. And of course, as a U.S. person, you should be worried that if they take the nuke, they will come after you because they're crazy. They don't care. So that was the second biggest. And the third one, because many people, like 10% out of the country, they're going protesting to save the public Iranian people because they're suffering from this government. I think all the
clashes with Hezbollah fighters in the on the border area and in Lebanese territory occupied right now by Israeli soldiers. At least six Israeli soldiers are receiving treatment for injuries sustained in those battles. Nick.
Nora, thousands of Israeli citizens are currently displaced across the country, aren't they? What's happening to all of them?
Well, I mean, this is, rinse and repeat, if you will. Over the past 2.5 years, tens of thousands of Israelis had to be relocated. Now the number is closer to 3,000. But with this intensity of confrontation with Hezbollah increasing, residents in northern communities are very worried, and with good reason. In 2024, some communities sustained damage to 60 and 70% of their buildings. 35% of all businesses that closed in 24 in Israel were in the northern communities. Hezbollah can exact a lot of damage there, and so Israelis are bracing themselves. Now, in the meantime, the Israeli army is promising massive destruction. The Israeli Minister of Defense, the Israeli Minister of Finance, who also holds a portfolio in the Ministry of Defense, has promised that the southern district of Beirut, the Dahiya, will look more like Khan Yunis. And this parallel continues with those forced displacement orders, Nick, with choosing the route on which the Lebanese who are displaced can take, whether it's in southern Lebanon or in Beirut. And in the meantime, we're even hearing from the opposition leader who says the only way forward he can see is to continue the assault on Hezbollah and to create a sterile area in southern Lebanon free of Lebanese building, completely under the command and occupation of Israeli forces.
Nora, thanks for that. Nora Day reporting there from Ramallah. Thank you. Thousands of people have been fleeing their homes in Lebanon, as we've been hearing, as Israel steps up its attacks across the country. Israel has issued forced displacement orders for southern Beirut, which is home to hundreds of thousands of people. Israel has been striking southern Beirut for several days now, and France says it will provide armoured transport vehicles and other support to strengthen its cooperation with the Lebanese armed forces. Zena Hodder has more now from the southern city of Tyre in Lebanon.
We're making our way to the southern city of Tyre in the early hours of Thursday morning. The Israeli army issued yet another warning for people to leave areas south of the Litani River. As you can see, as we drive through the streets, traffic is very thin, shops are closed, people are worried, especially since there's no end in sight to this latest confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah. Human rights groups have criticized the Israeli army's evacuation order, saying forcing an entire population to leave their homes violates the rules of war. South of the Litani River to the border, this is 8% of Lebanese territory, and hundreds of thousands of people live in this area. The city has already come under attack. Israeli airstrikes targeting what it calls Hezbollah's military infrastructure. We are in the center of the city of Tyre. It was also repeatedly targeted during the last confrontation in late 2024. Attacks like this cause further displacement, destruction. Many people have still not recovered from the last conflict. Many homes, many buildings still lay in ruins. The country is cash-strapped. The government has not been able to help the people. People are poor. Israeli strikes also targeted electricity generators in the city. People here are telling us this is part of a strategy to make the city unlivable and to force people to leave. The Israeli military also targeted Qard al-Hassan branches. This is a financial institution affiliated with Hezbollah. The Israeli military really has been targeting anyone and anything related to Hezbollah. But as you can see, widespread destruction. This used to be a commercial district. So much damage. It is obvious that many have left this southern city. There are still those who have chosen to stay. The question is, for how long? Zana Khudr, Al Jazeera, Tyre, southern Lebanon.
The United Nations says so far more than 33,000 Syrian refugees in Lebanon have been forced to return back to their home country. Let's speak now to Abeda Hito, who joins us live from a border crossing between Syria and Lebanon. So, Abeda, this is essentially a form of, reverse migration, isn't it? Many of these people are Syrians who fled the civil war in Syria. So what are they saying about their decision to return back?
People are definitely having mixed feelings about coming back, mostly because of the circumstances in which they've been forced to make that decision. Even though the United Nations has been conducting a voluntary return program for Syrian refugees in Lebanon since the regime fell. It started about a few months ago, where they're actually providing support to people who decide to come back. But now that the situation in Lebanon has escalated significantly and the violence is spreading across the country, people don't really have any other choice. And that's turning into what you're seeing here. These rows of trucks, as you see, that are being filled with the belongings that Syrian families are able to bring with them from Lebanon to the Syrian side of the border. They're packing their stuff into these trucks, taking care of all their paperwork, and then making their way across the border, and then continuing on to their final destinations. We've spoken to people who are crossing that are headed to Aleppo, to Hama, to Homs, to Damascus. So this is not the final destination for these people. They still got a long journey ahead of them. I spoke to one family just before getting on air with you, and they've still got a 6-hour trip. They've still got a 6-hour trip on the road, packed into a truck with all of their belongings before they can actually get home. So people are definitely feeling exhausted, and they've got mixed feelings because they were hoping to be able to come back under better conditions and circumstances, but under these very auspicious circumstances and the unclear nature of what's going to come next in the next days or weeks ahead, it's really making people feel anxious and I guess very somber about their return to their country after it's been liberated. The Assad regime.
Abeda, thanks for that. Abeda Hito reporting there. Well, the head of the International Energy Agency says the crisis unfolding in the Middle East has led to questions in some quarters about whether to go back to using Russian gas. Let's cross to Osama bin Javed, who's live for us in Brussels, monitoring events there. And this is a pretty controversial issue, Osama, isn't it?
Absolutely. The last 4 years, Europe's done its level best to wean away from Russian gas, but it has replaced one supplier with the other. In the case of Germany, 96% of its now energy comes from the United States. And the International Energy Agency said that this is a clear issue because one of the reasons why Europe was so vulnerable was because it had a single supplier. And now that this crisis drags on, there is a warning that, according to Fateh Birol, the International Energy Agency's chief, that it would be, quote, a mistake to go back to Russian energy sources. It appears to show that after his meeting with Ursula von der Leyen and other leaders, for him to come out with a statement so strong indicates that there is murmurs in the European Union about looking for alternate supplies, because so far they have been insulated from any impact, but the spot prices have been going up. The price of diesel has risen across Europe, and again, it does not have the kind of reserves for gas that it had. He also made a case that now is the point to not just invest in renewables, but Europe needs to come back to the nuclear power issue and resurrect it as a pillar of its energy security. So security and energy are intertwined in the European structure, especially after what happened 4 years ago with the Russia-Ukraine war. You're already seeing the ripples of that in countries like Hungary, who are now in a war of words with the Ukrainian president, talking about a pipeline that is carrying oil and gas from Russia. So it just goes to show that as this crisis lingers on, the ripples of it are being felt far and wide, and Europe, which so far is saying business as usual, nothing is affecting them in the short term, is seriously having to rethink of where its oil and gas come from. in the future.
A story from Brussels, Azama Javed reporting. Thanks, Azama. There have been more Iranian missile and drone attacks across Gulf nations hosting US troops. In recent hours, several countries have been targeted. A hotel, apartment buildings, and an oil refinery were attacked in Bahrain. Explosions have taken place in Kuwait, and Saeed Khatib Zada justified attacks on neighboring countries hosting US forces.
We have no option just to put an end to the presence of United States in the surrounding area of Iran. We told the Americans and we told our neighbors that if they would like to put an end
Doha.
There's been a number of attacks in Saudi and Bahrain and the UAE. We've seen attacks in Doha again this morning. The Ministry of Interior confirming a wave of drones were attacking Al Udeid Air Base, where U.S. CENTCOM is hosted once again. So really it is a continuation of what we've seen over the last 7 days. We're into a week of this conflict. And what we are seeing is diplomatic missions are beginning to take more seriously the fact that they may have to begin thinking of getting their citizens living in this part of the world out of harm's way. And that the United States, in the beginning days of this war that they started with Israel, put out a statement saying that do not expect any help from the U.S. State Department or from diplomatic missions. There are no evacuation points. If you want to get out, you should, but you have to do so using commercial means on your own. A week later, just a few hours ago, the U.S. Embassy here in Doha putting out a very different statement, saying that the U.S. government is ready to help Americans leave the Middle East if you choose to take advantage of the options available. On their social media page, on the State Department US Embassy for Doha website, they detail different ways of how they can get out. There's a form you can register on. They are beginning to look at getting people out of the area if they wish to go, if they wish to leave at this stage. It also goes on to give a bunch of security guidance, and one of the points that they make really does give you a sense of where they think, where the U.S. thinks the threat from retaliation, the direction in which this conflict is going to go in coming weeks. In it, it says to shelter in place, and the security guidance is, to the extent possible, remain inside your residence, hotel, or another structure, and stay away from windows. Please remain vigilant as Iranian government and its proxies may seek to target Americans in retaliation for U.S. strikes against Iran.
Well, as we've seen, the US and Israel are pounding cities and towns across Iran, and Iran is retaliating with its own missile and drone attacks in the region and beyond, as it's just been described. Al Jazeera's defense editor, Alex Katopoulos, looks at the Patriot air defense system that countries are using to defend
Bahrain, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, as well as to protect the US bases in the region.
Well, dozens of people have demonstrated in Colombo condemning the ongoing strikes against Iran. Earlier this week, an Iranian warship was torpedoed by a US submarine off the Sri Lankan coast. Manil Fernandez has more now from Colombo.
And a demonstration outside one of Colombo's oldest mosques, the Davatagaha Mosque, against the attacks on Iran. What you've got is demonstrators here holding placards. If I can just switch over this way, and I can tell you, we've obviously got the police doing some traffic control. It says we must oppose the war launched by Amerika and Israel. It talks about the shedding of blood. It basically opposes the attacks on Iran now.
It is a serious concern because it has impacted all over the world, not only Sri Lanka, to everywhere around the world.
And protesters here very much in solidarity with Iran. If you look at these placards, no blood for oil. This one, the world without Zionism, for a peaceful world. I mean, these are the kind of messages, and the general sort of sentiment here is that what's being done by Amerika and Israel is illegal, and that should not be happening right now. Manil Fernandez, Al Jazeera, Colombo.
In the results that have been counted is a very clear shift to the RSP, the National Independence Party. What some people here are calling a blue wave. Now, we didn't have much of a sense before the election because of the tight restrictions the Election Commission put on polling information, but that was what we were hearing from people that we spoke to, that they wanted, that they wanted to vote for a change. And the question now seems to be not is the RSP going to win, but by how much? And will they get the 2/3 majority that will allow them to change the constitution? That also suggests that Balendra Shah, the charismatic rapper and former mayor of Kathmandu, could be heading towards the job of Prime Minister. It also signifies a huge change for politics here in Nepal, with people deserting the traditional parties that have ruled decades. But it certainly seems to reflect what people told us as they were voting yesterday, and that was that they wanted a change. Tony Chang, Al Jazeera, Kathmandu.
Just been observing pictures in Beirut, in Lebanon, the capital of Lebanon, ongoing Israeli strike, and this is just a great plume of smoke just suddenly materialized, and so of course another strike has struck. Right as thousands of people have been fleeing their homes in Lebanon as Israel steps up its attacks across the country. Now, the United States and Venezuela have agreed to re-establish diplomatic relations 2 months after the U.S. forces captured and detained the president. Nicolas Maduro is facing drug trafficking charges in the U.S., which he denies. Maduro broke off ties with the U.S. in 2019 after it recognized an opposition candidate as the winner in a disputed election. The State Department says the move will help Venezuela transition to democracy. Electricity has been restored to parts of Cuba after a shortage of fuel left much of the island in the dark. Officials say it could take 3 to 4 days to fully restore power as crews work to fix a broken boiler at a thermoelectric plant. Cuba has been dealing with fuel shortages since Maduro's capture, and that move cut off Cuba's oil imports, and the US increased its blockade of the island. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán says he will stop transit shipments that are important for Ukraine. This follows damage to the Druzhba pipeline that carries Russian crude oil to several European countries. Shipments through Hungary have been delayed since late January. Both Russia and Ukraine have blamed one another for the damage. Well, that's it from me, Nick Clark. Up next, Inside Story examines why Hezbollah has joined the conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran.
Weakened but defiant, Hezbollah has been attacking Israel as it pummels southern Lebanon and parts of Beirut. That's despite the Lebanese government's ban on Hezbollah's military activities. What will be the fallout for Lebanon? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. Lebanon is once again drawn into a war many of its leaders say is not their fight. Against the government's warnings, Hezbollah has joined Iran in its conflict with Israel. The armed group says it has a right to respond as part of what it calls a resistance campaign. But this time, the Lebanese government has responded by taking the decision to ban Hezbollah's military activities and demanding it disarm. The group has not heeded that warning. Now, as the war between the US, Israel and Iran widens to Lebanon, can Hezbollah's involvement be of any real help to Tehran? And what price will Lebanon pay as a result? We'll talk to our panel of guests in just a moment. But first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Israeli airstrikes once again rain down on Beirut and batter South Lebanon. And fire rages in the town Tia after Israeli forces hit an electricity facility. Israel has issued evacuation orders telling residents to move north of the Litani River. So far, more than 83,000 people from the south of Lebanon and southern Beirut have been displaced. Many are now sleeping in shelters and relying on aid to survive. Israel has been pummeling Lebanon near daily, despite a ceasefire with Hezbollah in November 2024. But this current escalation began after Hezbollah fired a barrage of rockets on northern Israel on Monday, in support of its main backer and weapons supplier Iran, after joint Israeli-US strikes killed its supreme leader.
Hezbollah
Hezbollah and its Islamic resistance are responding to the Israeli-American aggression, and this is a legitimate right. They wanted a battle in which they reached the furthest limits, but our choice is to confront it until the ultimate sacrifice, and we will not surrender.
Israel has pushed further into Lebanese sovereign territory and says it has troops on the ground.
Northern Command has moved forward and is creating a buffer, as promised, between residents and any potential threat.
But historically, Hezbollah has had some success in ground wars, and analysts say the group may see this as an advantage. Hezbollah was created in 1982 to fight the Israeli occupation of the south, supported by Iran. The group declared victory in 2000 after Israel withdrew from the area. In Lebanon's sectarian political landscape, they have been one of the major representatives of the Shia population in government and provide them with basic services such as schools and hospitals. But many Lebanese people say they act as a state within a state. The Prime Minister has called on Hezbollah to stop its military operations.
The Lebanese state declares its absolute rejection of any military actions launched from the Lebanese territory outside the framework of its legitimate institutions. It affirms that the decision of war and peace is exclusively in its hands. Which necessitates the immediate prohibition of all Hezbollah security and military activities as being outside the law and obliging it to hand over its weapons to the Lebanese state.
The November 2024 ceasefire terms included Hezbollah's disarmament, which had begun. The deal came after the group suffered huge losses to Israel during the war that began in October 2023, including the killing of its leader Hassan Nasrallah. And because of that, Hezbollah seems to consider this fight with Israel to be an existential one. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss all of this further with our panel of guests who are joining us today on Inside Story. And in Beirut, we have Heiko Wimmen, the project director for Iraq, Syria and Lebanon at the International Crisis Group. Nimrod Novik is in Tel Aviv, a member of the Leadership of Commanders for Israel's Security. He served as a senior policy advisor to the former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres. And in Washington, D.C., Nabil Khoury, a former U.S. diplomat and non-resident fellow at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Let me start with you, Heiko, because you are there on the ground in the place where, in recent days, bombs have been falling. What is your assessment of why Hezbollah decided to take the action it did after the death of the Ayatollah?
Well, I would say I take them at their word. They said right after the attack in the first statement that this was to avenge Khamenei, and like kind of tacked on at the end of that statement was and the defense of Lebanon, which is I would say is a nod to the fact that. Burning Lebanon on the altar of Iranian interest, as you could put it, is not something that is very popular in Lebanon, including perhaps within the bases, the grassroots support of Hezbollah. So it was certainly that motivation. It was the motivation to join Iran, to join the, let's say, the center of the axis of resistance in this fight, and then we can discuss whether that was an order from Tehran or whether the people here did that on their own accord. But this seems to be the central motivation.
So, Nabil, one of the reasons I'm asking that question is to rewind till last year, June of last year, during the war then, the war that lasted 12 days. Israel attacked Iran, then joined in by the US. Of course, we didn't know that that was going to be just 12 days at the time. It could have gone on much longer. Hezbollah, on political level, we're told, reassured other politicians as we'd seen those forces arriving, those US forces, that armada of forces arriving, that it wasn't going to be dragged in. Does it suggest to you that perhaps there is some division within their ranks?
Very good question. I mean, so we hear that they gave these guarantees, if you want to call it that, and there have been reports suggesting that there was something of a rebellion, perhaps of parts of the military wing, if that's the right word, against the political leadership about this stance of not engaging. I don't think anybody is in a position to come to a judgment on that. I mean, what exactly goes on in the decision-making processes inside the party, what role perhaps Iranian cadres have at this point, it's pretty much a black box to me, at least. I don't have a lamp to really shine light into that. I would also say at this point it perhaps doesn't matter anymore, because here we are. Hezbollah has joined the Iranian war effort, so to speak. And just to add to the question, or to the answer of Nabil, I think one difference between June 25 and now is that in June 25, I would say that Iran was looking for calibrated response to the attack. Right now, they're hitting everywhere they can with everything they have. So that perhaps is also a difference. And Hezbollah is just one of the things they have. So use it, even if it may not move the needle much.
Nimrod in Tel Aviv, we saw a very quick, devastating response from the Israeli side. Was this just a response, or was the Hezbollah attack a pretext, a good excuse for something that Israel already planned? Because the attack on Iran by the US and Israel was done at a time of their choosing. Had they always planned when that was going to happen, they were going to hit Lebanon and hit Hezbollah too?
Yes, I think you're right. It was an opportunity that Hezbollah provided Israel with. I think that Nabil was right in referencing Gaza in this context, but from an Israeli perspective, it's a different dimension. Since October 7th, 23, something quite substantial has changed in the Israeli mindset, security and otherwise, and that is a lesson learned not to wait until adversaries strike, and not to count on our appreciation, understanding of intentions, but rather focus on capabilities. And the pendulum, in my judgment, has swung too far in the other direction, whereas there is a sentiment that if we can, we should. And I think that militarily, I don't think there is doubt that we have the capabilities to deal with multiple adversaries. But what is missing, in my judgment, is the diplomatic leg.
Nimrod, what do you think Israel actually wants? Does it want a stable Lebanon, or does it want a weak, fragile country there?
There is a great appreciation for the courage and resolve of the current government. There are doubts about capabilities, and that's where perhaps diplomacy and other instruments should kick in. But yeah, I think Israel wants a stable Lebanon where Hezbollah might remain as a political force for sure, but is not threatening neither Hezbollah nor anybody else. Threatens our civilian population.
Nabil, talk there of the new rulers, the new leaders in Lebanon, because you do have a new top team, a new Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam, who has been an international judge and an ambassador, and a new president, Joseph Aoun. They have also taken a new approach, a very different approach, now that conflict has broken out, saying that Hezbollah needs to stop all military activities. Are you surprised by how bold their approach is, and are you worried about where it could lead, though?
Well, I'm not surprised. There's a lot of pressure on them from Washington and from Tel Aviv. But their words have not really been translated into any kind of wise action. And I'm thinking of diplomacy here. There are many analysts in Israel as well as in Washington who understand full well that the Lebanese state, the Lebanese army, does not have the capability to disarm Hezbollah, and does not have the political will to do so, knowing also that if they did, another civil war would break out in Lebanon. The problem is that the political appointees, the government, the decision makers in Israel and Washington don't understand or refuse to understand, and they don't care if they push Lebanon towards another civil war. So the question here is, the new government wants to have the exclusive right to decide war and peace. Fine, everybody agrees. Fine, everybody agrees in principle to that. But the Lebanese state has historically failed to do either. They've never defended the border of Lebanon, and they've never used diplomacy effectively enough, first of all, internally, to agree on a national defense strategy that all Lebanese would agree to, and then use its contacts in the West to help bring about peace, and to begin with stop the daily harassment by Israeli forces.
Heiko, I mean, the big question, or one of the big questions here, is what has Hezbollah got now? What are their capabilities? What is their weaponry? How many missiles have they got left? And that remains a very unanswered question, because we don't know how damaged they were in the last war, 2023 to 2024. What's your assessment?
I mean, well, for that, you should probably ask our friends in the Israeli military intelligence or think tanks that speak on their behalf. I don't know. I simply don't have no way of knowing. No access to this information. But I think what we see is that there are residual capacities. There is residual capabilities. They can shoot missiles, smaller salvos. They can fly drones. It doesn't seem to be much compared to where they were a year and a half ago. Basically before the big Israeli strikes were launched and before the campaign really got serious. But it's still enough to create a nuisance, at least in the northern Israel. It's still enough to send people to the bunkers. It's still enough to give Israel a pretext to say we have to occupy a buffer zone up to the Litani, up to the Awali. We'll see how far they want to go, right? So that capacity is clearly there, and that is important because it suggests that structures of command and control and logistics and communication do work. Even though we still have apparently near complete intelligence penetration by the Israelis. I mean, the way that they do pinpointed attacks on Hezbollah personnel or Iranians clearly indicates that. And this also means if they can do that, if they can coordinate enough and efficiently to actually attack the Israelis under fire, under this kind of pressure, with this kind of intelligence penetration, then they surely can also mount a coherent military response if anybody comes domestically in Lebanon, the Lebanese army, for instance, comes after them and their weapons. And I think this is very important to realize and keep in mind. I mean, there have been suggestions that they're non-existent, that they're completely destroyed, that there's no way of pushing back. If the army would only push once, so to speak, this whole structure would be collapsed like a house of cards. They would be shown like Naim Qasim will look like a Wizard of Oz. I think after these few days, I don't think anybody would propose that anymore. And if he or she does, it's reckless.
Nimrod, let me ask you the same question about the strength of Hezbollah. I know you are no longer plugged into all the secret Israeli intelligence, but you are very plugged into what's there in Israel. How strong do people think Hezbollah is? And let me add another part of the question. Also, how strong is Hezbollah's leadership? Because Hassan Nasrallah was killed in the last war. Naim Qasim, many observers say, is no Hassan Nasrallah.
Yeah, I think the sentiment in Israel, you reflected it accurately in terms of the leadership quality, the charisma, the command and control, etc. The perception here, at least in the public domain, I have to be careful, is that Hezbollah has residual capacity to cause considerable damage. They have not used the few dozen longer range missiles that they do have. They used only short-term ones, short-range ones, as well as a few drones. In both categories, in all three categories, they still have residual capacity. I believe
firepower. And at some point, the feeling in Hezbollah leadership is, if we don't react now, we will lose the ability to react, period. And so they jumped into the fray. And again, they're banking here on Israeli society tiring from this war and Donald Trump tiring from the economic cost, which is huge, which will ultimately affect the average consumer in the US and therefore the average voter. So he may stand to lose a lot of votes in the upcoming elections. So this was a gamble on Hezbollah's part, but in the end, they do have a fight still in them, certainly with Israel, but I think more importantly internally. If there is a confrontation with the Aliyah, which I doubt very much that it will come to that, but if there is a kind of a mini civil war in Lebanon, different weapons, we're not talking about long-range rockets anymore, we're talking about small arms and hand-to-hand, and in that area Hezbollah is still very strong. So they're still a factor.
Heiko, you are there in Beirut. The Lebanese people have suffered so much over so long. I want to focus on them for a moment. Very resilient, used to real hardship and very weak government. But, you know, we had the war from 2023 to 2024. Before that, financial blast. I mean, how tough is this for ordinary people there in Lebanon right now? I hear the figures of displaced have now gone up to 90,000.
Yes. Look, I mean, it's very different depending on where you sit. You know, of course, I mean, it's a strain and a drain on everybody. Well, I mean, my kid is out of school, right? I mean, and 3 times where I moved, yesterday, like somebody who was coming, and she was lucky, but an hour after she reached home, like a relative of mine, so 4 people were killed on the airport road. You know, that affects everybody. But we really need to talk about the displaced. You know, so the displaced, it's now 90,000. There have been displacement orders for all Lebanon south of the Litani. Sur, Tyre, city of about 200,000, you know, which, I mean, if you take these orders literally, these people will all have to leave. Today, there was a displacement order for all of Dahiyeh, which is half of the metropolitan population of Beirut, 1 million people perhaps. If only 20% of these people flee, there's going to be complete chaos and mayhem, you know, and these people have no shelters. There is no government. With the government is completely, I mean, it cannot respond to this. I mean, it would be foolish to blame them. Nobody can respond to this. These people, many of them are displaced for the second time now, you know, and Hezbollah has, for all we know, no capabilities to help these people at this point. It's going to be, I mean, a disaster, humanitarian disaster of, I think, for this country, unprecedented size.
Okay.
And that size.
Okay.